This is LS, and you're on Thorin's YouTube channel, so cut the Western shit.
This is episode 35 of Narrative Wake. Usual host, Thorin, joined here by Kelsey Moser. I've noticed all that changes with Kelsey is she either just looks normal and everything's fine. I mean, obviously people are already going to debate that in the comments, but I'm living in my reality. I get to decide the definitions of my reality. So in my reality, she just looks fine. Or she has just had a shower. It's those two scenarios. I don't know why those are that's like the binary that you exist on, Kelsey. But today, you're just looking fresh, right? You muted yourself, but
sure. I mean, I look fine, I guess. I took a shower as well, so I'm not sure if is this like, have we found the middle of the binary, or because you just said I look fresh, but
not mutually exclusive. You can look fresh and
fresh
out of the shower. Same thing, you know. Not necessarily fresh out of the salon.
Already a riveting episode, you know? It's like, this is the type of conversation people come for right
I'm starting
here,
it with the emotional connection, Kelsey. What I've realised is, you know, we've been too strict in our scenario where it's like, you know, I'm like the entertainer, the host, and you're like the mega mind that I just tap into for all the information. I'm trying to forge some chemistry here, trying to get an emotional connection that this can be the relationship that the fans grow to love, and then hopefully they like the show as well. You know,
trying to prove that yes, I am actually a human being and not just a really awkward alien. So it's good.
Okay, so well, speaking of people who are in fact human beings but could be considered really awkward aliens, we've got in the bottom right hand corner Alphari from Misfits, who not such a media darling, but I have seen you did the Euphoria podcast with Deficio, so fair enough. You obviously can take a bit of banter, and you also are someone who is, for whatever reason, I don't know why I'm throwing this in like it's the bottom of the poster, you know, but you get a high rating from LS, whatever that means, friend of the show. So listen, people know LS, very critical of a lot of Western players, doesn't think they're that good, but he said you were one of the best, so not bad. And also, you did make top 8 at a League of Legends World Championship. And, you know, listen, I know, you know, to a lot of people, like, who cares? It's top 8 playoffs, no big deal. But to some people, that's a quest still yet to be accomplished in their careers, Alphari. So welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, no problem. Because, I mean, listen, I didn't make the rules, but people do tell me that all that matters is Worlds. So anyway, speaking of the fact that all that matters is Worlds, Hauntzer here is a multiple-time LCS champion. He's done everything domestically. Listen, no one can touch this guy. He's always on top. He's in the finals. Well, almost every time, but, you know, mostly every time. You know, since he got to TSM, he's got a lot of titles. The Worlds part, we're going to sort out still. There's still time on that one. We don't have to give up. You know, you're not like Double Lift. We haven't just given up on you yet in terms of international competitions. We believe still. But has been tricky. You know, still figuring that one out. And I'll also say, to tie it in, I'll give everyone an LS-related reference. Because here's the thing, Kelsey, just be careful when you tangle with Hauntzer, because you might not have thought of this, but he was coached by both LS and Welding Green in his career. So you have to understand, you aren't even watching the same game he's been playing. Like, you live in different worlds, you know. There's no overlap for you two. You understand that, right? So, anyway, this episode, if people haven't guessed by the guest list, is going to be a specialised one talking about the top lane role. Now, I actually realised when we came just a day or two before this to get ready to do it, that it's probably the most awkward time to do this particular episode, because normally top lane related episodes, like any of them I've heard that were like SOAS or anyone else, it's usually just people complaining and being like, oh, top laners were so hard done by, oh, bloody mid laners get everything, you know, which is totally justified, by the way. I agree with that, obviously. But the problem is, at the moment, that's what like every role's doing. Like AD carries are like, we don't even exist anymore. And then apparently Talia's just the best jungler. So I think the whole game might have gone to shit, but we'll pioneer on anyway and pretend like it's like the way League used to be. So here's the first question. Hauntzer, as someone who has played at the top level for a number of years now, in the beginning of this year, when we were coming into 2018, where was the top lane at as a role? I mean, people will think, you know, of all the different good players around the world. You had someone like Khan, for example, over on the King's Own team, who was in the best team, and if some people were saying he was the best player in all of League of Legends. So where was the top lane at as a role, do you think?
I think top lane was not a very impactful spot because just the amount of potential to carry is just less than bot lane, and that's how it's been like almost forever for League, but like in the beginning of this year, you could play some carries, but in the end, it kind of just shifted to tanks like Sion and Cho'Gath, and I think that's how top lane always is. There's like opportunities to play carries and carry matchups, but most of the time you want to be playing tanks and just help your team get a good team comp.
Okay. Why do you think that is, Kelsey? Why does it always seem to divert back to tank? Like, even if there's a period when you can play the carries, it still tends to even out that most people are like, just play tanks, basically.
And a lot of stuff is just that it's pretty efficient to get, especially as those Alphari have developed, but it's like pretty efficient to get resistances if you're going into health or something like this. And a lot of tanks have damage even that scales off of health, so you just like get a lot from that stat also. Like tanks can be somewhat versatile, especially with banner or whatever, where if you're just, you can push side lane and then win matchups 1v1, but then also group. So it just like ends up being a more versatile playstyle or a more versatile type of champion to pick, especially if you're getting damage output from other roles more efficiently.
Okay. Alphari, what do you think? Where was top lane at for most of this year, prior to the crazy period now?
I mean, I thought it was in an okay spot at the start of the split. There were some like really high impact champions, especially Gangplank, but like these champs were OP, right? Especially Gangplank, but then Gangplank and Vladimir got nerfed, and I think if there aren't any like really insane carries for top lane, then yeah, like you said, you just end up playing tanks because they're just going to be more efficient than like an okay carry or an okay tank. You play the tank, and then yeah, you just play tank. You take no resources, and bot lane will carry.
Is it a problem that even when you do get things that you can play as a carry, like Camille's an obvious example, that it does then sort of lead into a scenario where they'll then just be like a really good counter to that, which means that it makes the draft kind of trickier to even get something like that out?
I mean, for sure, it's easier to counter carries more than tanks, and like if you play something like Camille as opposed to an Ornn, then the Camille is going to need a lot more resources, so your bot lane is also going to have to play very differently. So it's a lot harder to play, and that's why you see mostly like the best teams, or well, maybe Kingzone aren't the best team anymore, but they were pretty good. They are pretty good playing mostly carries, as opposed to like less good teams playing basically all tanks.
Okay. So Hauntzer, this is something that I've heard a lot of people stress when they talk about the possibility to play a carry champion in the top lane, which is like, it's not as simple as like, does the top laner play that, and is he a good carry player? It's like, it's pretty much depends on the personnel in your team. Like, do you have a bot lane that can survive this? Do you have a jungler who can help you if you it's clear that you kind of you telegraphed it like, look, I'm going on to a carry, I'm probably not just going to farm only. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I think playing a carry in top lane doesn't just mean like being mechanically skilled enough to play. It also means like being able to shift the whole team's mindset into giving resources in the top laner and then playing around that. Obviously, there's like some carries that play differently. Like for instance, like GP and Vlad, they usually just want to scale up. They don't win lane very hard, and they just want to like get farmed and play for late game. But you have champions like Jace or Camille who like really need to use their power spikes well, otherwise they get outscaled by tanks. And those champions, you really have to like pull the team around you and play around top a lot. And if you don't, then they're going to be a lot less useful than like a tank, for instance. And so everyone on the team basically needs to like understand how to play the top. And if you don't, then playing a carry won't work out.
Kelsey, do you think that, like, when I say that, like, it's a bit telegraphed, like, obviously, if you pick something as extreme as Camille, you are, in theory, going to try and side lane or be the carry player at the top. Is that actually any different to the other roles? Like, in some sense, can't you also tell by what people pick in the other roles, what their kind of concept of what their comp's going to be and what they're going to try and do in the game? Is it more extreme for top?
I mean, I think when you look at any draft, you have an idea of how a team wants to play it out, or like an idea of what the ideal setup would be at a certain period in the game, 20 minutes or whatever. I think that top is an interesting role because think that like the way that top laners play ends up varying more compared to like AD carries because of the pool of champions they have to master. So you have to be good at like playing this tank, and then suddenly you have to also be good at like having side pressure and making sure you're communicating with your like mid setup, your AD carry support or whatever, and like telling them you can move forward and get the wave now because I have pressure here or whatever like this. So there's a lot of different skills I think as a top laner that you have to master depending on the champion. Obviously now the meta is in a kind of a weird spot, so that's not strictly true all the time that top lane has the most variety of different champions that they're playing, but historically that's been the case.
Okay, right. Hauntzer, does this play into the old trend that people noticed years ago? I think actually LS was one of the first people to do a piece of content on this, which was that it eventually got in League of Legends so that you were either going to have the tank be the top laner or the jungle, basically. And if you actually look historically as to when jungle has all the carry champions, it tends to be when people are just only playing the tanks in the top lane. And it's kind of like those two roles, kind of like one of them had to kind of take the hit for the team, as it were. Is that still a factor now? Is that not is this tied into the concept, or would it still be very difficult to play carries regardless of whether you have a tank jungler?
I'm not sure if that's really relevant now, because it feels like you can play like carry jungler and carry top, but in order to like have the best team comp, you kind of want some kind of CC, and usually carries don't have any CC. So it just so happens that like top laners and tanks have the most CC and like most, I guess, efficiency out of every other champion. And so do junglers and supports. And like, you know, even some mid and ADs have like things that can bring the team together. And so I think most teams will prefer with a tank top because it's easier to draft around and just a lot easier to play around. But you know, you can still play like carry top and carry jungle with like, say like an Ashe Braum, for example, like in bot lane. They have a ton of CC and some engage, so like when you group up, you can actually do something. That's why most teams don't run like 5 carry champions, even though they can win all the lanes in the mid game. They're just going to fall apart in team fights. Okay.
Has this actually impacted you directly? Because when I did my interview with Bjergsen, I think this is the interview I'm remembering, like the assumption people would have outside TSM is that you're like Odoamne, there, who apparently actually legit loves to play like the tank and sort of give up, you know, the carry role to someone else. And his idea is that, you know, I'll do what I can with the low resources. And Bjergsen basically made it sound like you just did that because you had to. Like if it was up to you, you'd just be trying to carry the game all day long. Like you wanted to play more carries, right?
Yeah, I mean, I never like playing losing matchups. And usually like when you blind pick a tank, depending on like the enemy team, they're gonna like choose you one way or just like play tank. And like I don't mind playing tanks. I think I'm pretty good at it, and there's like a different skill set that you need to play, and that's kind of enjoyable. But mainly for me, I just don't like getting bad matchups, and usually the tanks are on the worst end of that.
Okay. Alphari, what's it like for you? Like, what would your preference generally be? Like, what's your mentality when you're a top laner?
Well, I too would prefer carries to playing tanks. I think most top laners would. Playing champions like Maokai and Shen and Cho'Gath, they can be fun sometimes, like when you're just flashing on enemy AD carriers Cho'Gath and one-shotting them, but the majority of the time, you are either going to be playing them in a losing matchup, or you're just going to be playing tank versus tank, in which case there's really like very little interaction during lane phase, and you're basically just waiting for your foreman to do something or like to get ahead somehow and like involve you. So it kind of just feels like you're not doing much, as opposed to a carry where you can obviously have a lot of impact, especially if you get played around.
Okay. Like Kelsey, that's a bit depressing, isn't it? Like you'd hope at least one of them was like, no, I actually enjoy playing tanks. It's a better way to play the game, you know. Like if these people aren't doing it out of choice.
I think it's, I mean, as a pro player, obviously you do what your team requires you to do. I think like a lot of top laners got into League by playing something like Jace or Aurelia or something like this. And then they just really enjoyed playing those champions and diving people and like killing them like that. But then they go pro and you can play those champions for a while, but it's like your team needs this, and then of course I'm going to succeed in this regard. And so it's just like balancing that type of idea. It's also interesting because I mean, the mentality has been that it's much, much easier to play like this type of grouping style or this type of like tank style that I think has affected a lot of people just because that's what's practiced more, as opposed to like practicing mid-game setups differently, or like, okay, I think if the way that people were approaching the game were more practiced in certain regards, then maybe the narrative would be that X style champion is easier, like that this carry style setup is easier if I'm doing a 1-3-1 or something like this. But I think a lot of it is just also you're always playing tanks. You're playing tanks so often, and then it's like, okay, I'm pressing my ult in a team fight, okay. And so that just like exaggerates how boring it is, because first of all, it's like not as involved, and then you're doing it all the time. So I think that's the biggest thing.
Well, let's explore that assumption then, because yeah, you're right. Yeah. Unfortunately, if people think of the typical paradigm of League of Legends, part of the reason why you're going to want the tank to be the top laner, and obviously a lot of them, just by virtue of the fact they've had to play them so many times over the years, that's what they're good at as well, that people are going to think, right, well, we're going to need that so that in the team fight, he will just zone people, he will just tank all the damage, and then that's traditionally the way it's played. But obviously you don't have to play a team fight, you don't have to team fight. There's lots of different ways to play League of Legends, right? Is it as simple as like that's just the way people think the game has to be played? What do you think, Hauntzer? Like, is it trickier to pull off? Like when you know going into the game we're probably not going to team fight now, we're not going to group up. Does it make it like a bit more difficult to play out?
I think the reason tanks are so prominent is because they're the easiest to play out, and they're the most forgiving when you can make mistakes. So like if you play like a 1-3-1 comp and you're playing double split pusher, like say you're like down on tempo and then maybe team rushes Baron. If they get Baron, you pretty much lose the game and you have no comeback potential because you can't fight back. So there's a lot of risk involving like playing more carry style, but you know, the payoff can work. But that's why most teams will prefer tanks, because there's a really easy goal in the game. It's just like, you know, let's scale up and then play for team fights. We can like force Baron, or you know, just siege something and engage. And I think most teams will cater to that style, especially in LCS, because like right now it's best of ones and people are less willing to take risks. And yeah, I mean, it's just an easier style and a lot safer.
Okay.
Let's say, I just wanted to ask, like, let's say in a scenario, if there's like an objectively best tank, like say it's Cho'Gath or Ornn or whatever, and then so one team gets like that tank that will have like the easiest time in a fight or have the most impact in a fight, and then they also get like, for a while it felt like Caitlyn was the absolute best AD carry that you can pick or something like this. So what if the enemy team gets like an objectively better team fight comp? Is there ever a scenario where you would look at that and say, okay, it's actually going to be difficult to run a team fight comp into this?
I think you mean like they have like a Kaisa or something that like also scales well.
So if like they have maybe better tanks and better ADCs, but yeah, go ahead.
In the drafting phase, I feel like it's pretty hard for that to happen. But if that does happen, and you already have those champions, like you just gotta stick with it and try to outplay them. Because when it comes down to team fight versus team fight, I think a lot of it's based on like the mechanical skill of players, like ADs and mids in team fights, and how well they can play, and like how the game goes. But overall, I feel like most teams will just be fine with running another team fight comp right into that.
Okay. Alphari, one thing I wondered about in this respect is obviously when it comes to what champion's going to be played in an LCS match and what the comp's going to be, the coach is going to play a massive role in it. So it matters what the coach thinks as well, not just what the top laner thinks. In your team, in the teams in Europe, do the coaches generally think that the carries are viable in the top lane? Is there a type of scenario in which they're more likely to give the go-ahead for it? What's your experience been?
I think it just depends on, first of all, like the meta. So if it's a full tank meta, you're obviously not going to play carries, but also on just the team's style and perhaps a little bit on the top laner as well. But from my experience, if I think a carry's good in a situation, I'll tell my coach, and like he's usually pretty trusting, and he will, usually like let me play it if it's in a good situation. Obviously, if it's not, then I can play a tank too, and just suck it up for the team. But I think most teams in Europe are willing to play carries. Like you have Wanda last split playing a lot of carries, and like even Smitty J from H2K, he's a pretty decent carry player too. I think it's just, it just depends on the meta mostly, since I think most coaches are willing to.
Okay, what about you, Hauntzer? Because obviously you've not only had the aforementioned LS in the more recent days, obviously Path, but now you've got even a Korean coach. So what's it been like from yours?
Yeah, I feel it's very similar. It's mainly just meta dependent. If you can get a really good match up top with a carry versus like a tank or something, then my coach will let me play it. And I feel like most other players and teams in NA would also do that. There's also like some weird players like Huni who like almost always just try to play carries because he wants the team to revolve around him, and it's really funny because they're not playing the best style, but they always try to make it work.
How do you think that happens then? Because obviously you think of every Huni team except SK Telecom kind of had this rep, that he's going to try and sometimes even force it when they're not necessarily viable. And listen, yes, in the playoffs, maybe they haven't had as much success after the Fnatic era, but in regular season, he's gotten a lot of wins doing so. How do you think they managed to do that in their team?
I don't know. Huni's he must be very convincing to his coaches and his teammates, because if I was trying to do that to my team, it'd be like, nah, I think Orange's the best pick here. Just pick that. Like I wouldn't be able to get like a Lowry or some shit. I don't know how he's so successful. It's just really weird how he can win like almost every game in regular season and then just completely be useless in playoffs. And yeah, it's a very surprising record.
Okay. What is your theory on that, Kelsey? Because obviously the problem with that narrative is it's one of those ones where at first you want to be like, well, it was only 1 or 2 splits, but it kind of like it's one of the most consistent narratives at playing out where it works in the split and then it does in the playoffs. So what's your theory on that?
So regarding like, are you saying that Huni's style, like you think it fundamentally won't work in playoffs, or is there just something about Huni? Is that which question?
Basically it's first of all, obviously he generally will just try to force the carries anyway, but then the outcome has been that despite the fact it somehow works, perhaps in spite of itself in the regular season, it doesn't tend to in the playoffs.
So I think for me, I think Huni is very good at like establishing consistent side pressure. And just like always being able to get a matchup where he's hitting the 2-item mark and he's having like 1v1 threat, but where it falls apart is kind of like how his team is setting up across the map, and people are able to sort of exploit like, okay, this split, for example, Equifox just had really bad vision around Baron, which didn't necessarily have anything to do with how they were playing out the game, right? It had nothing to do with Huni side laning, but it was like, after a while, teams are kind of recognizing this like poor setup issue, and they're finding ways that they can abuse this, and that happens like over the course of the split and towards the end of playoffs, where they can just recognize it. Maybe even in a longer best of series, it's like, okay, first game, we saw this, where the way they're doing this vision setup, like if they do that again, we can win second game, for example. So I think that kind of tends to happen with a lot of Huni's teams, where I don't necessarily think it's specifically the style that he's playing, but it's just the fact that like, okay, the style is really impressive and the style is really working for them, so they don't necessarily always work on some of the deeper seated problems until they're really challenged, and then at that point it's already too late and they've lost the playoff series, I think.
Okay. Alphari, have you actually ever played against Huni?
Yeah, at both SKT at Worlds.
Right, yes, okay. Oh, yes, obviously. I forgot about that. Forgot he was in SKT, actually. Deleted that from my memory. What do you think about this, then? Because obviously that was a famous incident where, I mean, basically their whole logic of bringing him as the top laner instead of bringing the sub-top laner was like, we're just going to go all in on this style and he has to kind of try and carry these games. And in that series, he had some mixed results, I guess we could say. So what would you say about Huni? What are your thoughts on him?
I do think that he's a pretty strong carry player, one of the stronger ones. And yeah, like, I think he's a good laner and he's good on carries, which you kind of have to be good on carries actually, but it just works well for him since he probably gets, like, if you're in a carry matchup versus a tank, you probably already like a counter-picked him. So you're probably going to get a lead anyway. And I think Huni's just like a decent laner, so he's going to get a bigger lead than he probably should. And he just seems to be good at snowballing. He gets resources from like basically every team he's been on. And maybe his team will like fall off later the split goes, but I do think that it's just because they like rely a lot on early game, and as teams kind of get better and improve their fundamentals and just like experiment more with different team comps, whereas Huni's teams will kind of funnel in on just keeping or continuing to snowball and playing the same kind of top lane meta, that they lose their edge.
Okay. Is it at all a factor? This could be open to anyone. Is it at all a factor that where you would pick the top laner rather in the meta when it comes to draft affects what you can actually play in the top lane? Like, will teams leave the counter pick towards the end of the draft for top lane? Is it even that significant if people are likely to just pick the tank anyway? What would you say to that?
I feel like most of the time, even if it's pretty good to counter pick top, it's going to be more valuable to counter pick mid because, well, just mid pressure is really important, at least if you can counter pick mid meaningfully. If it ends up just being like a farm matchup mid lane, then sure, counter pick top. But I feel like most of the time, if you have to choose between counter picking top lane or counter picking another role, it's going to be more beneficial to counter pick the other role. Even if it's like support, if you get like a winning bot lane matchup, that's probably going to be a little bit more useful than counter picking top. Again, like obviously if there's like a really snowbally meta, like I don't know, like in 2015 Worlds where there was like Gangplank Darius, maybe that'd be a top lane meta where it's more valuable to counter pick. But most of the time, yeah, I would just say more valuable to counter pick mid and bot lane, unfortunately.
Yeah, I would agree.
Kelsey, correct me if I'm wrong,
Yep.
but isn't that something that the Kingzone team actually did, basically? It was just like save the counter pick for Khan a lot of the times to get him the lane match he wanted.
Yeah, that ended up being a lot of what I think was part of their issue at MSI, was that they almost always saved counterpick for top, or I mean they did it for mid a lot as well, which is fine, but the MSI meta sort of developed for counterpick support a lot, and they almost always will like 1-2 pick on red side their bot lane.
Okay.
But I generally like it's interesting because you have to ask yourself, what are you getting out of counterpick top, counterpick mid, and counterpick bot? If you're generally, when you're counterpicking top, what you're getting is consistent pressure on top side. So you can either play around bot like this and just expect and assume that your team will get better trades on bot, because obviously if like bot and top both have like semi-okay matchups and top is just like getting gangbanged by enemy jungle, but you have like so much tempo because you're able to snowball bot and bot takes turret faster and bot is like super head, then maybe it's worth it. But the other option is just playing around top, and then if that's the case, then enemy team just plays around bot and you're playing around top and you're going to lose the trade in that scenario in most cases. So I think that that's probably one of the bigger reasons why like bot became more favorable. It's just like, first of all, bot lane was really strong and you had more gold and on the bottom side of the map, dragons became stronger, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just like, okay, maybe after 10 minutes it's worth it or to play around top, you get Rift Herald, whatever, but then it's mostly just like you have to weigh what you get out of each side of the map.
Okay. So what about this then? Since the Kingzone team was the best team for basically the split until we got to the MSI, and they were very, very dominant in Korea, and as a result, as I mentioned, Khan got a lot of praise as a top laner, and he was playing this carry style. Like, I'm looking at his champion list now. He played Gangplank 8 times, Jace 6 times, Camille 6 times, and then a game of Fiora, a game of Riven, and a game of Vladimir. So basically, except for when he played 3 games of Sion and 7 of Na, and Na's like, you know, obviously more like in the middle, he basically was almost never playing tank. He was in a situation where he was allowed to play these carry champions and kind of style on people. What did they actually do in their team, though? Like, Hauntzer, when you look at that King's Own team, every other top lane in the world obviously can't just say, just do whatever they're doing and give me all the top lane carries. So how were they able to actually allow him to play these carries and be successful, do you think?
I think the biggest key to being able to play carries top is how well you synergize with your mid and jungle. Because, I mean, you think about the ways to snowball top lane, you basically either gank the other top laner, you can dive the other top laner, or you can get a lot of vision so you can just punish your matchup. And those all have to do with mid and jungle pressure. If your mid and jungle are winning, they're going to be able to like roam on one side of the map, and King's Zone, I think, just chooses top side a lot of times. And they give Khan like the wards he needs to play it really aggressive in lane, and they also dive the enemy top laner a lot. And like that's why you see KZ play Talia a lot, because Talia always has a lot of early pressure and she can roam. And you know, they play Talia Jace, that's their signature combo, and they just dive top at like level 3 and then dive them again like level 6. And I think that's probably the most important part of playing carries top.
Okay. What would you say, Alphari? Is there any other element to it as to how King's Own was able to do it?
Well, for last split, at least, like I said at the start of the meta, it was like a little bit carry orientated. So that obviously helped, but they are the best team at playing around top for sure. Like BDD's a fantastic roam player, maybe the best, like roaming mid laner. So when he can play champions like Talia, which he could last split, and like any split before that, he can just roam top lane, and Khan is obviously a really good laner as well. So the enemies are usually going to be pushed in under the turret, and then either like deny him a wave or you kill him. And yeah, they're just really skilled. Like even like playing Gorilla, they're really self-sufficient compared to a lot of other bot lanes. At least that's what it seemed like until MSI. And obviously that really helps because they can just kind of 2v3 versus enemy jungler and their bot lane, while Khan and BDD are kind of snowballing the top side of the map. So it's all kind of just the 5 players being really good at their roles and knowing their limits, and also just being more comfortable playing carries, it seems like.
I also kind of felt like King's Zone saw the map like come mid-game when the lanes are open and then top laners inside. Like they wanted to get pressure mid to allow their top laner to kind of push out more, and so this was their approach. But if their bottom lane's behind, they couldn't necessarily secure that. Whereas domestically, like at least earlier in the season, they didn't really have a hard time just being self-sufficient and being able to get pressure with their bot lane in mid-game. Partly maybe because a lot of Korean teams would just opt into like 2v2 top lane with jungle top. I also don't necessarily think King's Zone were insane early game team, because they had a lot of games this season where they did kind of like screw up the 2v2 top, and they were just like really strong in terms of resetting the sidewave bot and then grouping mid. That was like a style they were working on a lot, which was something that they hadn't really played as much in previous seasons. So it was kind of interesting, because I don't necessarily think they think we have to snowball our top laner ridiculously. We just have to get him to a point where he's able to like do well at a 2-item spike, you know? And I think that was kind of what they were going for. But their bot lane at MSI in the grand final was just like losing too much off of them playing around top lane, I think.
Okay. Because I actually, I've referenced this on a past Narrative Week episode, but I have an interview forthcoming with Flame, which is like subtitled, so he gets to actually say his real opinions in Korean. He's not having to just pretend like he can speak English like he still pretends like he does. But in this interview, I ask him about exactly this. Khan getting to play all these carry champions. Obviously, in theory, Flame wishes he could play. And then the other example I obviously give is Smeb, because if you think of the old Rocks Tigers team, and then not as much in KT now, admittedly, you know, obviously famously got to play a lot of carries. And actually, his answer in terms of the overlap between the two teams, the main factor that he gives, okay, so when he gives like the Longju example, you know, he does say stuff like, oh, he had a jungler that was very good early game, etc. But the only overlap between the two players, Smeb and Khan, is that he says both players obviously had the exact same bot lane. They had Prey and Gorilla as their bot lane, and he said the strength there was that bot lane could always play well defensively, and that this actually like opened up the top laner as a result to be able to play carry style, because presumably they're not just getting ganked all the time, you know. He actually has like jungle attention himself. Obviously, that's an extreme example because in that particular case, both players had the exact same bot lane. There was only one bot lane that was definitely able to make this happen. What's so tricky about that, Hauntzer? I mean, you have Smed and Mythy. People would say this is one of the best Western bot lanes. Is it tough to convince the bot lane to play? Oh, wait a second, she's died.
Well, I think my bot lane right now is Smed and Mythy. They're able to play a lot of different styles, and they're very consistent at whatever they play. Unlike my previous bot lane, like Doublelift and Bellfrost, they were really focused on winning lane, and they weren't the best at defensive play and being just like not dying to turret dives or stuff like that, or playing when the map is split against them. So it's a lot harder to play carries when I was on that team. But then on this team, I feel like I'm more free to pick whatever I want, just because my bot lane, I know if like the map's split, then they won't get completely shit on, and they'll play like humans and just not at the enemy team.
It's interesting the way that the narrative sort of changed from, oh my gosh, TSM never pick Jace, never pick carries, to, oh, TSM only win when they have GP, or TSM only win when they have carry top. So it was an interesting shift last year and this year.
Also, absolutely depends who you're getting the information from. Because if you did an interview with like Doublelift last year, he'd be like, "What are you talking about? We don't just play the win lane. That's not true. We're team players, bro. We just play whatever the comp is and whatever. In fact, I don't even pick my champ. The coach champ is what I play." It's like, all right, mate. Well, anyway, let's just see what day it is we caught you on here. Oh, it's a Monday, right? Okay. What about this then? So obviously, the first part of this interview, since both of you did say you both ideally would play carries, or you'd have more of an option to, and it wouldn't have to be so dependent on all these other factors. It has been set up as though the whole episode's just going to be, as I said, the classic top laners complaining about the meta. But there's a world in which we can move past that. So in a world in which you have to play tanks or bruisers or whatever it may be, the downside of this is the narrative I want to address first, is that, like you said earlier, Hauntzer, the perception is, like, a good thing about this is not just that you have a tank in every comp and that you don't have to set up this carry top laner in this very specific way, but a perception is also that it's somehow easier to play these champions. I mean, obviously people would very cynically say, in certain scenarios, you want to put someone on a tank there, and you just tell them just don't die and sort of stay vaguely close in CS, and you can still do something later in the game. Now, that's a pretty extreme way to say it. Obviously, like I said, it's a very cynical way. Is there some truth to that, though? Like, are tanks something of an equalizer among top laners?
Yeah, I mean, tanks are probably like the most efficient champs, the easiest to play around, easiest to draft around. Yeah, I mean, they're just so consistent in what they do, unlike carries.
What do you think, Alphari?
About the...
Like, is it just essentially the cheap version? Is it easy to play tanks? Can anyone just play tanks?
Yeah, I think so. I think, okay, well, maybe not anyone. Like, obviously you need like a couple games to be able to, I don't know, smash your keyboard in the correct way, but
reasonable.
I do think they are definitely easier than carries. Like, you can just look at their skills as well, like Maokai, like, the biggest outplay you can do is Flash W as compared to like a Fiora or Camille, right? And the interaction in lane, again, on these champions is really low. So usually it's just going to be like, oh, well, either he has push or I have push, and yeah, that's it. We're just going to go basically even in farm. And I think it's also easy to play just mid-late because, well, you have a much easier Baron condition than if you have a carry, because you have someone to tank it or like look for engages around it, which is just a really easy way to win. And I think it kind of plays into solo queue as well, where usually in solo queue you're going to win by team fighting nearly every game, or by just like snowballing out of control early game. But most of the time, if you're playing like, a normal game in solo queue, it's going to be like won by team fights, not by like a Camille split pushing. You're just going to end up like someone fighting or getting caught. And I think that's just the mindset a lot of people have, and a lot of people practice with, that team fighting. They get to practice team fighting a lot more, basically, from solo queue, I think.
Okay. Kelsey, you are known, if people think through their mind of your favourite top laners, you have something of an affinity for the tank top laners, right? The guys who really can play a fantastic team fight. Obviously, your Spirit Animal Coro 1 coming to mind here, but others as well. What's your take on this? Because obviously the difficult part is there's really two elements to it, right? Is it easier just objectively compared to all champions? And then is it easier and therefore, and this is what I hope you'll address as well, does it then mean that it's kind of more of an equalizer when it comes to the pro game? Like when you think of some of these people we've talked about before, Goro 1, Odoamne, these sorts of people, does the fact that they're playing a tank actually make it more difficult for people who aren't in their team to even know what they're doing, what edges they're bringing to the game?
I guess in terms of like me appreciating tank players, it had a lot more to do with the fact that like, they absorb a fair amount of pressure and then they're able to know like when they need to push out side lane and then when they want to group with the team or anything like this. So like if we are playing against a comp where you can only push to river, like you can push like a wave past river and then you have to group. Or if you're playing like even with tanks, a lot of times it's just more optimal to keep pushing side lane all the way, like as much pressure as you can, because maybe you still win the 1v1 matchup against the other tank, for example. So just like those types of scenarios I think are really interesting. And yeah, I do really appreciate a lot of, because I actually think in some scenarios it's almost more difficult if you're constantly being pressured in side lane to find like the good flank opportunity or to make sure you're getting the Baron and make sure you're using your TP or you're not using your TP. Like if you're in a scenario where you're a tank player and you have to use your TP to group, but then you can't go back bot and then the enemy team has like insane amount of threat, you still need to be able to like you kind of have a time limit or a time crunch window where you're finding the fight, right? So I think that that's actually like really interesting and really cool to see. Obviously, probably not the favorite thing in the world for top laners to do, but I think it's like a really interesting thing to watch. So,
sure. Okay, so what about this then, Hauntzer? Okay, it's a little bit more nuanced, right? It's not like you just you have more CS, you get more kills. Those are easy things for anyone to see on the scoreboard. But I guess one thing Kelsey's basically saying here is, okay, sure, you're not going to do some sick mechanical outplay in a tank, but decision-making is going to be a massive part of if your team wins the game, right? I mean, actually, I think, believe it or not, Hauntzer, if I'm pulling correctly from the old memory banks, you were one of the people who was the ire of Monte Cristo's rant back in the day on Summoning Insight, where no NA team at the time ever seemed capable of ever doing a TP flank. And I believe he actually did cite you when you were in Gravity as one of these teams, because I think your team was one of the only ones that, I think you had Altec on your team at the time, right? And basically, this is one of the reasons why he kept winning all these team flanks. No one ever just did a TP flank on him at the time, because no one did that back then, apparently. So what do you think of the nuance element of being one of these tank top laners? Or it doesn't have to be tank, it can just be non-carry, basically.
Yeah, really depends on the champion. Like, you know, those TP flanks, Maokai was really strong back in the day, and Maokai probably has like the best TP flank in the game with how much presence he has and how much engage he has. But yeah, like when you're playing that kind of tank role and you don't have to push and you're just playing off your team, I think what really matters is decision making and being able to communicate well with your team, like setting up those wards for you to TP on, or knowing when you have timers to roam and like give up CS. Some games, like say you're losing or something, and you just really want to force a team fight, like one of the carries has no flash, you just kind of just have to give up bot wave, give up farm, and just try to force a fight. If it doesn't, then you lose a lot of farm. It really feels bad because, you know, you're not getting any resources and, you know, your team's losing. You pick this champion for your team, but then you're also losing and you can't do anything. Sure. But so there's a lot of like, you gotta have a lot of mental resilience as a tank player. But you know, there's just like little things that make people better. And, you know, Impact, he's a really good tank player, and I feel like he knows when to make the right decisions a lot of the time.
Okay. So Alphari, I mean, what he was kind of touching on there is the other part of being a top laner, right? It's like the old school way where you could just play a carry champion if you were some star player was like, how far ahead of the other guy am I going to get? But there's an element to which it's like the inverse mentality, right? It's like, what pressure can I absorb? Can I take a worse matchup and just not do quite as badly as someone else? It's kind of a different mentality, right? Does it take a different mental approach to be able to do that? Can you still take pride in being in a losing matchup and just not losing as hard? Is that easy enough to change your mind too?
Yeah, I think it's fine. I don't think it requires much of a different mentality. You just kind of need to realize that you're not playing for yourself. You need to be pretty selfless. As a carry, you need to be very selfish. So, like Hauntzer said, you need to give up waves a lot of the time, just to help your team out. And it's kind of so if you have the chance to give up a wave on the top lane and to get a wave ahead on your AD carry, you're going to take that every time, basically. And you just need to kind of think of the game that way, that, resources on you don't matter. And you're just trying to do the most you can with what you have.
Okay. Right, Kelsey, what would you say to that then, in more of a sense of how you're going to construct a whole team then? Because obviously the ability to absorb pressure and to have poor matchups is going to create advantages elsewhere in the draft, right?
Yeah, you mean from constructing a team in the sense that if you're putting a team together, are you going for a top laner who's happy with that, or are you going?
Yeah, and how do you think of your team if you've got someone who can do this? How does it change factors? Because again, this is something that won't show up on a score sheet. No one will really know what you did in that sense.
I think I'd almost prefer a top laner who I'd almost always take a top laner who's really able to gain advantages in lane and push for these advantages in lane, because I think that skill gives you a lot more versatility. Because even if you're playing a tank, say you have a good tank matchup that has push or whatever, and you're still pushing, and then an enemy jungle goes to you, and when you know when to back off, and it relieves a lot of pressure on the rest of the map. So even if you're playing an extremely aggressive tank style, and you die maybe a couple of times in lane, it can still be really rewarding for your team if you're getting insane advantages bot. So I still would almost always prefer to have someone who is able to constantly exert pressure in top and look for that kind of player over a player who is just always hugging turret and doesn't want to step forward in lane, or is losing a lot of matchups or things like this. So even if they have the sickest TP flanks in the world, I think it's always better to have someone who knows how to and will exert pressure in the top lane in terms of team construction.
All right, what about this then? One of the things throughout history, whenever it has been especially heavy tank metas with only a few bruises you could maybe play sometimes, is obviously people who think of themselves as good top laners. I notice that's when they get frustrated, if they get criticized, or if people say someone else is better than them, but they think, well, that person can only play tanks, and if it changed off this meta, I'd be much better than him. Now, whenever the players complain about criticism like that, this is where we all have to actually say pay tribute to Lord Soaz, because obviously Soaz did embrace the meme by creating that whole dog champ thing, which, to be fair, is hilarious, because in a way he's made it fun that he's gonna have to play a shit champion, and then everyone sort of it is Soaz, so everyone knows he's gonna complain anyway, but in a way it's sort of endearing, But how do you actually handle that aspect? I mean, Hauntzer, this is something I've noticed where it's not even that necessarily people criticize you as much, that people don't really know how to critique your role if you're playing a tank, right? They don't know if you were doing a good job, or if you did an okay job, or if you were supposed to be ahead in CS on that matchup, or whether, for example, okay, so at I think it was, yes, at this last Worlds, when I did my video afterwards, and actually you were one of the players I didn't really blame that much, I saw there was actually a lot of backlash, and some people were saying, no, he was the main reason why they, fucked it up, because the things he did in the mid-game were the wrong decisions. Whereas I was mainly talking about laning, he did a pretty decent job there, and he generally obviously had to play the tanks. What would you say to this? Is it tough, do you think, for fans to have a clue as to what you're doing?
Yeah, I feel the fans only get what's right in front of them. They don't understand the like you said, the nuances of top lane, and I think the game in general, and the casters also don't have that much insight on it, I think. So when I receive that kind of criticism from fans of oh, I played this team poorly or stuff like that, I just kind of brush it off, because I already know what's right and what I should be doing, and if there's stuff I could be doing better. But it's definitely a lot harder for like the average fan to like understand how top lane works, because like I think a lot of them just like look at the numbers and look at like CS and stuff like that and like laning phase. You know, some lanes you're just gonna be giving up a lot of farm, and you want to be gripping a lot and try to force team fights. And if it doesn't work, then you're gonna lose. And when you're losing like that, fans will like really criticize you because like you're down like 50, 70 CS, and they'll be like, "Oh, this guy sucks, man. He can't even CS well. He's getting shit on by the enemy top." But really, it's like a completely different matter.
Okay. What about this then? Alphari, I have a question for you along these lines. So a topic that I've heard people discuss in the past, but it's hard to go into detail because you basically have to ask the pro players directly, is like how much pro players understand each other's role. Like if you have a mid laner in your team, does he actually really understand the top lane matchups? Like do even your teammates really know how to critique if you did well or if you did poorly? What would you say to that? Because I from my perspective, like to this day, I think top laner and jungler are the two who tend to complain the most that like the teammates don't always even know what they're doing and whether it was correct, and so it's hard to take criticism. What would you say?
I think it depends on the players. Like you're gonna have players who are like a rookie is not gonna be as smart about other roles as a veteran, in like nearly every case. So I think with my team, a lot of my teammates do understand other roles pretty well, and it's like not as complicated as I think it is. Like a player, like a teammate can point out to me if, you know, I wasted my time. Like if I'm just sitting in lane, not roaming when I should be, then that's like pretty easy thing to see. And that's like one of the most important things to do. Like playing a tank is knowing when to move. Or like knowing how to like pressure, you know, another part of the map. And I think a lot of my teammates, and I can like, you know, see like mid lane things as well, but I'm not going to like go into detail, or I'm not going to like talk or like pretend I know more about their individual like 1v1 matchups or like 2v2 matchups more than they do. But if I see like a map thing that they're doing wrong, then maybe I can like give advice on that. But I think it works like both ways, that they're not gonna, you know, also pretend they know more about 1v1 matchup top lane than I do. And because well, yeah, I'm like the top lane main, I know more about it, and they're the other positions, and they know about their like 1v1 individual matchups as well. Okay.
Hauntzer, what would you say to this? I mean, you've had some pretty bold characters in some of the other lanes in your career.
Yeah, I would agree. I feel like most players in LCS will understand what the other roles can do, and obviously you're not going to know the in and outs, but there's going to be like this basic general understanding that like, you know, the mid can roam on this timings, and, you know, sometimes they can't roam. Maybe support can roam at this timing, like when players can shift and stuff like that. I think that's all pretty general knowledge, but like Alphari said, like individual matchups, knowing how they play out and stuff like that, that's something kind of lost to me and just like kept to whoever's playing that position. Like I don't know how all the jungle matchups go, like level 3, level 6, stuff like that, but I know how top 2v2s go, and I know how to play against their champion if they gank me and stuff like that. So I think most players have like a pretty basic knowledge, and then they have a lot of perspective from their own positions, like how mid, jungle, and bot like work.
Okay. What do you think, Kelsey?
I mean, yeah, a lot of times players will just default to other members of their team. It's like, okay, should you get push in this matchup mid at this level? And they say yes. Well, okay, in that case, we should have gone dragon there or something like this. So there's a lot of like, oh, okay, as you know what to do in your 1v1 matchup, but this will inform like how we behave as a team. And so a lot of people are working on like generally the map movements of every single role, like in post-game discussions and stuff like this. So I think that makes sense. But yeah, it's obviously a detail setup. There might be like a disagreement on the team also with how the role should be played, like even from a macro sense sometimes. Like for example, if someone says no, like I can't move on this wave, and then the rest of the team says, even if like I have push because he comes back and he'll freeze it or whatever, and sometimes there will be an argument about whether or not that means we can make this play, or whether this person should be playing far forward in lane when jungle is on the other side of the map or something like this. Sometimes there will be those types of arguments, like, because that comes down to a fundamental idea of how everyone should be playing on the map, but it's generally, you can critique each other and it's fine, so.
Okay. Right, one question I had that was just like a very general one, so anyone who wants to jump in on this can, is whenever I see people critiquing the teleports in the game, like obviously, just with the way people tend to critique on Twitter, they tend to be, there's a lot of hyperbole, you know, like that's the worst teleport I ever saw, you know, probably not, you know, probably just a bad one or mistimed, you know. But when this happens, one of the parts that's confusing to me as an outsider, as a layman, is that some of these are players who've played years and years and years of the game. And so on the one hand, if it's super team related as to the timing they're supposed to do it, and then who's supposed to initiate it and whether they did it right, it's hard to put too much blame on the one person, and you know, it's multiple people are involved in it. But at the same time, are there players who just have a fantastic timing for this, and so you can put it onto the top laner as to how accurately he does that? What goes into that element of it? Because it's hard as an outsider to know who should be doing and saying what and how you time these things and judge them.
I think as a top laner, it's about like 70-30. Between you and your team, like how TPs work out. Sometimes, you know, you might just get baited. People call you to TP here, and you TP, doesn't work out, then you look bad. And then other times, you know, you just don't see a ward, or you TP at the wrong time, or you commit to TP instead of canceling. And so I feel like most of the decision is on the top laner. And you know, if someone makes a bad TP, then it's like, I think it's the top laner's fault for not recognizing the situation, because when you're looking at TP, you're just looking at the map and you're seeing how everything is. You have a pretty good overview of the situation, because you know, you're usually going to be in base when you're TPing, or in bot lane, just like not doing anything. So you can see most of what's going on, and it's up to you to make that decision to commit or cancel, or like find a different position.
Okay. What do you think, Alphari?
I agree. I think it is mostly the top laner's responsibility of like having good or bad TPs. Although I think obviously like a team can call for TPs too, and if it's in advance, then it is still the top laner's responsibility, I think. But sometimes there are going to be like very reactive or spontaneous calls that happen, and you just have to trust your team in a lot of those situations. And sometimes it will go wrong, but I think that's in the minority of TPs, like, you know, very primarily the top laner's responsibility, I'll say.
Okay, what do you think, Kelsey?
I think a lot of it comes down to, okay, the top laner knows like how their lane is, and that's the minimum requirement before the TP call is made. And it's like, I can TP now, and then bot can say no, don't, or yes, do, or something like this. But like, it's usually the top laner taking the initiative to call a TP play or ask if one should happen. So that's like kind of the minimum requirement, is always the top laner has to voice it first.
Okay. Right, Hauntzer, here's a question I have for you. Since, as we've referenced, there haven't been many metas in the recent years where you could just play carries as much as you want, and even if you can, we've already addressed, you know, it depends on the personnel of who's in your team and what type of coach you have and what the current meta of the other teams are. You know, there's all these other factors that go beyond, is the player good at playing this aspect? You are someone, correct me if I'm wrong, who still thinks, though, that if you are the best top laner and you play the best, as long as your team isn't terrible, you should still be able to be in the best team, right? You should still become the champion.
Or a league is a team game.
Yes,
so
it is.
I feel like you're referencing that the Immortals final, right?
What do you mean? Why am I referencing anything? I'm just asking if that's your perspective on the game, mate. You know.
I mean, I feel like I was the best top laner in that final, and in LCS that season. And
do you think that the role still has enough impact that if you're the best, then your team should be the best?
Depends on how well you can lead the team. because it's a team game. If your teammates know what to do and you can play however you want in top lane, then yeah, you can win. But if you're the best in one role and your teammates are just not picking up their responsibilities, or they don't know how to play some style, then you're not going to be successful in terms of like team games. Because like look at Faker. I mean, he's a really good individual player, but recently, he's started to fall off, not individually, but as a team, and he's not having the success that he's had before. That's because just like team cohesion, stuff like that is so important nowadays.
Okay.
I think, let's put it this way. Do you buy into the idea that if your team is the best, everyone on your team is the best in their role, like generally?
Yeah, I feel like maybe not individually, but knowing how to synergize as a team and knowing their roles on the team is really important. And if you're the one team winning, like look at RNG, like they know every single role on their team. Like Lemmy is like the tank player. They're gonna get Uzi fed and they're just play for team fights. They know all the roles really well, and they played better than the other team, and so that's why they won.
Okay. I mean, that's always a complicated topic anyway, because to be fair, whenever you're talking about best, this is one of the areas where, unfortunately, MOBA games especially will always be more difficult to judge than like Counter-Strike, for example, because best in this context might mean was the best in this particular meta. And so, I mean, famously, if you go back in certain times in history, I think there was probably some players who were the best top laner at that time for the sort of team that could win, but were they the best player? Yeah, that's tough to judge because you'd have to put the other player in a different meta. So it's always going to be a complicated topic. I think that one, there's definitely no right or wrong on that one. I think it's perspective. What about this then? Who do you think is the best top laner in the West at the moment, Alphari? Who would you pick? Who would be your number one name you'd put forward? Would it be you?
In the West?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Judging from the LCS seasons, like last split, I'll probably say Wonder, because I think he was the best performing top laner in Europe, and I can't like judge exactly how good NA top laners are. Although I did think Huni was pretty good, but then Impact looked better than him. And then I thought that Impact probably is just not as good as Wonder compared to his performance at MSI. So I'll probably go with Wonder, at least like based on last best performance. Okay.
Who would you pick, Hauntzer? Or who are the candidates? Like, he put a few names forward, so you can pick a few if you want. Is it you? If it's you, say it's you. It's no need to be coy. So I wouldn't consider.
No, I definitely didn't play well last split. Yeah, hard to tell. I think, like Alphari said, Wonder did pretty well, and he was able to get those carry matchups and play well on both carries and tanks, and he had a pretty big impact in every game that he played, from what I saw. For NA, I don't really know who's the best. I feel like, I guess Impact was the best because he knew the meta pretty well. Someday, I felt didn't perform like as everyone hypes him up to be, and let's see, what are the other top laners?
Huni.
I feel like Huni's just always Huni. Like he's gonna be good and he's gonna be up there, but to be the best, you have to play everything well, in my opinion. And he in some styles he just can't play it that well compared to other players. Yeah, so I guess last split, Impact would be the number one.
Okay.
So you said that, like specifically talking about Wonder, you said he was able to get the carry matchups and have an impact. Do you think a requirement of like being the best top laner in the West in that scenario is having a team that can allow you to play the carry matchup. So like having a strong bot lane that can absorb pressure, but also play, because you also mentioned Impact's versatility. So like, do you think that there's requirements put on the rest of your team for you to appear to be or perform as the best top laner in your league?
Yeah, I would think so, because you know, it's a team game. You can't just like 1v5, and even if you can win lane, then if you lose a game, you definitely won't feel like you'll have as much impact. And so you do need the team to play around you somewhat, but I feel like in terms of decision making and stuff like that, I watched playoffs, and he was a very strong Swain player, and whenever he got Swain, he always performed really well. And so from the few games I saw of him, I feel like Wonder played really well. And just in general, to be the best in any role, you have to have your teammates play around you. And like, you look at Levi, people think of Levi really highly, but he also got a lot of resources, so that's why they have like that opinion of him. But if you take away those resources, he's also just like a really good player. So it's kind of mix, but in terms of like performance, I think it really comes down to how the team plays around you.
Would there ever be a scenario where you're like, but this guy is just insanely good and he's elo held? Like, for example, right now, everyone knows Marin, but he's in legit the last place team in the LPL. So would you like watch a game that his team is playing and be able to say, nah, but this guy is still like insanely good? Would you ever have that idea that there's a top laner who might be one of the best, but he's on a bottom tier team?
Well, how would you define the best? Because
I mean, that's kind of what I'm asking you, right? Like,
oh, okay.
Would by your definition of like who the best top laner is, could that ever really exist?
No, I don't think so. Because I feel like if you're the best player on your team, you should be trying to lead your team and just try to take over the game and help them achieve victory, because in the end, that's what it means. If you have like a really good laning, but you don't know what to do in mid game, you don't know how to make calls, you don't know how to set up plays, then I feel like you're not any better than like the average player, you know? So there's like the skill set that you need to be the best, and if you're supposedly the best on the worst team, that just doesn't make sense to me.
Okay. What about this? So Alphari, you referenced before that you thought Impact was the best once it got once you got past seeing Huni in the regular season or whatever. Right. Obviously, throughout his career, Impact is someone who has been able to build his reputation post SK Telecom now for being a fabulous tank player. And if you think all the teams he's played on, he's often played with like MVP candidates, and he's thought of as like, right, what's great about Impact is you get him, you put him in the top lane, you know what you're going to get, he's going to play consistently, knows all the matchups, and then it's like someone else is going to carry the game, sort of, basically. If we were in a world where he had to play carries, would that diminish his, I mean, obviously no pun, but impact as a player? Would he be not as good? Does his skill set just suit one over the other? What would your take be?
I would expect him to not be as good on carries as he is on tanks, as well, he just plays tanks a lot more. But he could surprise me. He could end up being good on carries, but yeah, I just have no idea. I would expect him to be a little bit better on tanks, but it's not like he can't play carries just because he's a good tank player. I think it's maybe a little bit easier to play tanks if you're a good carry player, but it doesn't go like it's both ways. I think you can probably still play both champions.
Okay. What do you think on that, Hauntzer? Because I mean, if we compare Impact to you directly, you've shown more versatility to do both, I'd say, probably.
Yeah, I'd say I do both. Yeah, Impact, like, if you were to rewrite the meta and like make it carry top laners only and have like no tanks and just play that style for like a few seasons, then I feel like Impact's performance wouldn't be as good or consistent as it is right now. I think his strengths as a player really come from his decision making in game in terms of like map movements and knowing when to move from his lane to roam or TP plays and stuff like that, and not necessarily like mechanical 1v1s.
You all right, Kelsey? You've muted yourself, by the way.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay, are you talking to someone?
No.
Oh, okay, sorry. I thought someone was like off camera saying something
No.
to you, and you were like taking the abuse or something. I don't know.
No. Yeah.
Okay, what do you think on this topic?
What I do.
How would you gauge impact? Because I mean, I've obviously played my hand by the way I set the question up. Like, I do think he gets a bit overblown because, like, I mean, when's it ever going to not be fashionable to play fucking tanks in the top lane for the last 3 years? You know.
Yeah, Impact is a really interesting case because I feel like he has the skill set sort of to play like carries. He is able to win matchups that are like win strong matchups, even if it's like tank v tank or whatever. And he has kind of a better idea of when he should be sidelined and like when he can group than a lot of other top laners who just play tanks only. Because he's not necessarily overgrouping as much, though I still like criticized him a little bit for this. So I think that he still has a skill set where he could be theoretically good on carries, but every time he's like under a pressure situation where he has to play these champions, he hasn't necessarily performed to that level. So I think he's like a really smart player and he has a lot of uses, but I don't necessarily think he's the best top laner in the West, and I think something like that would hold him back. So
Okay. What about this then? Since the Kingzone team was so fabulous, and since, as we've said, Khan got to play all these carries, and people definitely were praising him, hyping him, depending on which perspective you have, a lot this split, right? Traditionally, Korea has produced some of the best top laners ever. You can think of them going throughout history, Marin, Flame, Smeb, there's a massive list of them, you know. For you, Alphari, when he was, obviously you can combine both. You can have the LCK split and MSI. Is Khan a unique player? Is he just the best carry champion and a carry player at champions? And so it's only if that's viable he's very good. Is there anything unique about him, do you think?
Last year, I would say there was something unique about him, especially when he was playing Jace. But on other champions, I'm not so sure. I feel like other players in just the LCK will be able to like match how good he is on carries like individually. Like Kuve, even Keen, like played like better than him in my opinion in the LCK final. And it's not like they're bad players; they're really good players. It's just that like Khan is a really good player as well, but Kingzone just have known this style for so long and are so good at it, at playing around top and just like further enabling Khan that he does look even better than he is. And I don't think it's as much this year, but yeah, last year there was definitely like something that seemed special about him when he was playing lots of Jace and just like 1v9ing after he got ahead in the early game. But now that like Jace has kind of fallen off with the new runes, I feel like he just can't blind pick in as much, and that's kind of diminished his effect.
Okay, what do you think, Hauntzer?
Yeah, I would agree. Comparing him to the other LCK tops, I feel like he's definitely up there, but it's hard to tell who's the best because you know, Kingzone, they have that style, and the other teams they're not as much top centric as KZR.
I think that Khan has. I actually felt like Kingzone played this way because they had a lot of young players who weren't as like versatile. So I actually felt like Kingzone developed their style in part because, like, whenever I saw Khan try to flank or something like this, it just wasn't that strong. So like he was much better off like staying sideline or something like this. But that also put a lot of pressure on their bottom lane to just like be safe and self-sufficient. So for me, it felt more like Kingzone were a little bit pigeonholed into a playstyle. And so when they got to Worlds, that was an issue because like Samsung played and targeted their bot lane. And it ended up in a position where like they couldn't carry out their compositions nearly as well. And they hadn't practiced like alternative styles as well. So I think that for me was always a point that I saw as a flaw of Khan. I actually think he got better at some of those issues this year, like where he's like grouping more and he's executing flanks better, but I think like some of those flaws still showed through at MSI, despite the fact that they were practicing that more in the regular season. So I think that that's always like the coin flip for me. Like I think Khan is a young player who's really, really good at playing like this sort of hyper pressure style, but he still is developing in a lot of ways in terms of just like balancing pressure across the map, making sure his mid lane can walk up and stuff like this. And yeah, so this is always like my issue with Khan, but yeah, he's obviously like a very strong player within his specifications.
Okay, right. As a last topic, a way to close this up, then we'll put them to the test, Kelsey. So I've already given them. You know, I've been as fair as I can. I've pointed out all the nuance and how it's so tough when you're outside of a team to know how good a player is or what he's doing. So the test has got to be, we've got to pick someone who hasn't played tons of matches, but he's in a good team and his team had some level of success. So leave it to them to pick apart how good this guy is and give us their thoughts. So we'll start with you, Alphari. So the storyline for the Fnatic team was obviously they already had a pretty good team. They kept most of their players. Their top laner is obviously legendary, long time top laner Soaz, who's been in that team and played with some of the players in that team, many splits now. When they had this scenario where he got his injury and they had to bring in Bwipo, seemingly out of nowhere generally for people who only watch LCS, and they were still able to win LCS, they went to MSI, they were doing decently enough over certain periods of the group stage, but maybe not beyond that. How would you gauge him? What do you think of him as a player and how you saw him play in a limited amount of games we saw?
Well, when he started off playing in the playoffs, I was not so impressed. I think he didn't play so great, especially versus Wonder. But I think he actually had good performances at MSI. His laning phase seemed to be strong, but I also think like he was getting some good matchups that maybe the enemies were disrespecting him because like they don't know who he was. He looked strong at MSI, I think. But yeah, during playoffs, he didn't. So I guess he improved, or your top laners just that insane. I'm not sure, but
okay.
Probably he improved. Probably he improved, and I think he improved, and I'm not sure how I would rate him though. I just need to wait and play against him, I think.
Okay. Right, Hauntzer, obviously we will definitely give you a lot of leeway here. We don't expect you to watch every EU LCS game. Who the fuck would want to? But from the games you have seen of him, what did you think of Bwipo and Fnatic?
Well, I've only watched him at MSI, but okay. I would say he's not bad. Yeah, not as bad as you would think he would be. There's some games here or there where he kind of entered it in lane and he just got ganked a lot. But I think overall his performance, especially of like someone of his caliber and like who he is was pretty good at MSI. And he just might improve and become a better player.
Okay. So Kelsey, obviously when we did that MSI episode, you did address this topic like in more detail in that sense. So what I wanted to close up, can you just kind of give me your thoughts on like how do you gauge him as a player relative to like them winning LCS and then him being in a fabulous team and him being in a team where obviously people assume Soaz will come back now. So how would you pick apart all that mess?
I think that I didn't have like really high expectations from Bwipo at MSI, and he didn't necessarily excel like compared to what I expected either. I mean, he was fine. He was reliable. He had certain champions that I felt he played well, but I also felt like to an extent he may have had like the way that Fnatic played, I felt had some restrictions based on like his pool, based on Hillsong's pool. So there were some issues in there to an extent. It was kind of weird. I mean, he played some matchups really, really well. Like I actually think his Singed was decent, but I mean, he had issues with the Singed as well, like where he was like exerting a ton of pressure and dying, obviously, but the rest of the map did something off of it. So I don't know. He was fine. That's basically my TLDR, is that like I think he's good for a rookie, and that's about it.
This video was supported by Dean Tanglis, Gardner Wilson, Andreas, Snazore, Westerlund, Alex Adams, Mikkel Hansen, Bash, Daniel Yordanov, Yordan Tsenkov, TTMXMP, VeXii, HawpT, Robert Baxter, Travis Greb, and a special thanks to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to get teasers for my upcoming work? Find out who's coming next, what topics are being discussed? Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest to appear on one of my shows or in one of my videos? Would you like to ask a question in my monthly Patreon AMA, or perhaps even discuss esports as part of a discussion show I run on a monthly basis? Donators can also discuss the topics expounded upon in my videos with me and the other patrons on our Patreon page. All of this and more at the Patreon link below.